What's going on, guys? Today is a beautiful fall day and we are going to finally review the Mavic Air 2. I've owned this for over a year now and I believe it's time to finally do it. And what do I still think about it after all this time? Is it still worth it and all that? Well, let's check it out. The Mavic Air 2 has 48 megapixels. Well, technically speaking, it's got 12 megapixels. It's a quad Bayer sensor from Sony, but in the end you do get the resolution of 48 megapixels, so can't argue with that too much. It can record in 4K 60 FPS. It's got HDR and 8K time lapses. So I would say it's got quite a bit of tech inside, and keep in mind that not even the Mavic 2 Pro can do these things. Although the Mavic 3 just recently came out and it's a beast, but also it starts at $2,200 all the way up to $49.99. So unless you're really serious about it, it's probably not worth it. And so I would say that these are the strong points of the Air 2. 48 megapixel images, 4K 60 FPS video recording, 8K hyperlapses, HDR, 34 minutes of battery time. It's super compact and it's super easy to use. Alright, so one of the most important things, right? Image quality. And I'd say for a consumer drone, it's really rather good. The 48 megapixel photos are super detailed, you can zoom in quite a lot, the colors are pleasant, dynamic range is great, and one thing to mention is that the drone saves the photos in both JPEG and RAW file formats. You can't turn off the JPEGs, but yeah, that's not an issue. For the video, again, the quality is impressive, I'd say, especially for the small half-inch sensor. The image looks sharp, maybe a bit too sharp sometimes, so you might want to use those ND filters to add some natural-looking blur. It has a DCine-like file format as well, which is kind of like a light log profile, I'd say, with muted gray colors. It's perfect for color grading and to retain as much dynamic range as you can. It also gives you control over manual settings like exposure, shutter speed and all that. But I'll be honest, most of the times I use it in the automatic HDR mode because it's doing a pretty good job at maintaining and keeping as much dynamic range as possible, which is you know, pretty cool and easy to use. A step up from the previous versions and the Mavic Mini in this regard as well is the fact that it's got better obstacle avoidance, with sensors in front, back and below. However, not sideways and above, and you have to be careful about that because I almost crashed it while it was tracking me and the terrain was elevated. Basically it was a mountain, so yeah. The drone has 8 GB of internal storage in case you forget your micro SD card at home, but yeah, try not to do that because 8 GB is not a lot for 4K footage. On one side of the drone you have access to the card with the protective rubbery thingy, and on the other side a USB Type-C connection if you want to hook it up directly to your computer. The transmission is greatly improved as well, this time with OcuSync 2.0. It's now a dual band transmission and it can deliver 1080p live stream to your remote or smartphone up to 10 kilometers. Now, of course, your battery will be long dead by the time you reach 10 kilometers, but it's nice to have that extra range, extra confidence, and to be sure that you're not gonna lose signal and your drone. And indeed, I never suffered any loss of connection. So yeah, that's a must, I'd say. Tracking on this thing is for the most part pretty good and reliable. It works in 3 different ways: Spotlight, Active Track, and Point of Interest. But of course, if you make it challenging for the drone to track you, with, let's say, many obstacles between you and it will probably still lose you. It's also very handy if you're a narcissist who wants to film himself, but don't have any friends to hold the camera. Now, no one will ever know. The quick shots are really easy to use and fun, and I think it's essential that it makes using a drone easy for everyone and accessible. And I think my favorite one would be probably the circle one. Now, those 34 minutes of battery time are of course a best case scenario, and it will vary greatly depending on the wind, depending on whether you are flying in sport mode or not, how hard you're pushing it, things like that. But I will say this, it will last you for at least 25 minutes of actual use time, and that is still pretty great. But what I did, and what I would advise you to do as well, if you're not the ultimate pro drone pilot, is to get the Fly More combo, because for $200 extra you get so many more things, and most importantly 2 extra batteries, which will allow you to relax a bit and not be in a panic that you only have 20 to 30 minutes of flight time and you're rushing to get the shot, and it will probably ruin your experience and you won't get those great shots either. You get extra propellers, a 3-way charging adapter for all your batteries, and ND filters. And also a pretty nice and waterproof protective bag for your drone, and everything has its own place in it, so I'd say it's worth it. The controller is pretty big, but it actually feels nice in hand, and it will even charge your phone while you have it connected. It also comes with all 3 main types of cables, USB Type-C, Lightning, and micro USB. And going back to the batteries for a bit, DJI built a safety and longevity feature inside them, so after a few days in which you are not using them, if they are charged to 100%, they will slowly start to discharge to about 50%, so half their capacity. And the only way in which energy can be released is through heat, basically. So don't be alarmed if your batteries start to heat up after a few days in which you haven't used them. It's perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal and a built-in feature. But yeah, just keep that in mind, and only charge your batteries right before you're going to use your drone. My favorite thing about the Air 2 is, well, a couple of things actually, but they inspired the same thing, and that is confidence. With those 10 kilometers of solid transmission, 34 minutes of battery time, of flight time basically, and just overall having great maneuverability and being strong enough, powerful enough to face any kind of winds you might suddenly encounter when you are out in the field. I think that is way more important than any other bells and whistles that a drone might have. Flying a drone isn't necessarily an easy thing, so regardless of the video and the photo capabilities, you might want to make sure that you are nailing the basics, the flight of the drone. It will depend greatly on who you are and what you want to do with your drone, but if you are, for example, a casual user and not a heavy-duty pro who's making money out of it, the Mini 2 can be an option, and it's more convenient with half the weight, 249 grams, which is indeed very convenient, because from 250 grams there are laws in most regions of the world which will require you to register your drone. So skipping that step is Nice. But it comes with drawbacks as well, of course. For example, it has a smaller sensor, only 12 megapixels for photos and only 30 FPS for video, just to name a few, and a complete lack of safety sensors as well, except downwards. Another option we have is the Mavic Air 2S, and as the name suggests, it's an upgrade of this one, the Air 2, and it's a $200 difference in price if you buy it new. It will be more than that if you buy the Fly More combo, and while the drone is very similar, you do get some improvements, like the 5.4K video recording in 30 FPS, a 12 kilometers transmission now, 2 extra sensors on the top part, but the biggest upgrade in my opinion is the now 1-inch sensor, which will come in very handy in low light situations or just in general. It's always better to have a bigger sensor. Is it worth the extra money? Sure, for some people maybe, but especially if you can find the Air 2 at a discount, remember that there isn't such a dramatic difference between the two. And actually, keep in mind that the battery life has actually been decreased on the Air 2S because of the more powerful transmission. I won't be recommending the Mavic 2 Pro, although it is a solid drone, no questions about that, but it's now the oldest drone on this list, so for longevity's sake, it doesn't make much sense to me to buy a new one, but a used one at a great price, sure thing. Also not comparing it with the Mavic 3 either, because it's not in the same category. That is a pro level drone, and so I wouldn't recommend it for most people. Unless you know you have to have it, then you don't really need me to tell you that in the first place, do you? So, as a conclusion, I think the Air 2 aged really rather well. I was kind of expecting it to be obsolete in a few months after I bought it, but that's not really the case. And sure, there are newer models out there that came out, but they're not really revolutionizing anything, in my opinion. They're more of incremental upgrades. So if anyone is asking me for a drone recommendation, this is still it. This is my go-to. Hope you enjoyed this one, and over and out.